Hi. All right. Thanks for being here. I see some folks here. Thank you. Appreciate that. Let me make my screen longer. Okay. I'm at a rest stop. I am so grateful for the technology that allows you to use your phone as a hotspot. I'm just gonna say it, right? I am grateful. That is what has made 2 of these while I'm on the road possible. So that's great. Using that. And you know what? There were a couple comments yesterday to the whole issue of circumcision, and I'm not going to dive back into that. I am sorry that it wasn't more clear from what I said, that I am equally upset by biblical passages that condone harmful things for males or men, boys, bodies. That I care about that as well. I do. I promise. And I'm sorry that wasn't more clear. So, and I appreciated that someone commented and said, you know what, feminists who aren't on board with asserting that mutilating someone else's body, as in the case of circumcision of an infant's body, that feminists aren't on board with that just being problematic is part of what keeps people from seeing how even though categorically different, seeing how utterly atrocious female genital mutilation is. So these are 2 separate categories of genital mutilation. But I hear when someone says that to me, and I appreciate that, and I get it, and I will, moving forward, right, change my narrative on that. If you're not familiar with FGM, female genital mutilation, it is worth being aware of. It is still a thing that's happening, not just, it's happening in various continents, various countries around the world, still today. And it is not actually circumcision, it is genital mutilation, which is, again, circumcision, someone could say, is just a genital mutilation, right? They serve 2 wildly different purposes, regardless of whether it's appropriate. They are motivated by very different things. Regardless, okay? It's doing something to someone's body that you do not have the right to do. Got it, right? Okay. So today we're talking about Genesis 18 and the parts that relate to this conversation about sex, the relationships we call marriage, and this other issue about abusing people's bodies in relation to genitalia. So there are 2 significant things going on in Genesis chapter 18, and I'm going to read them both today instead of separating them. So that we can spend the time tomorrow talking about the Sodom and Gomorrah, or the Sodom story, Sodom and Gomorrah. But I want to kind of treat it as 2 separate pieces today. So beginning of Genesis 18, just going to jump in. The Lord appeared to Abraham by the oaks of Mamre as he sat at the entrance of his tent in the heat of the day. He looked up and saw 3 men standing near him. When he saw them, he ran from the tent entrance to meet them and bowed down to the ground. He said, "My Lord, if I find favor with you, do not pass by your servant. Let a little water be brought, and wash your feet, and rest yourselves under the tree. Let me bring a little bread, so that you may refresh yourselves. And after that you may pass on, since you have come to your servant." So what we're seeing is an element of great hospitality to strangers or foreigners. And somebody is near my home, I'm going to offer them hospitality. This stands as just a basic example of what the people who are the descendants of Abraham are supposed to be like, which is what we see very much in contrast tomorrow in Genesis 19. Okay, so whether it's Abraham or Lot being hospitable, they are the example of what to do. Okay. So let me bring a little bread, that you may refresh yourselves, and after that you may pass on, since you have come to your servant. So they said, "Do as you have said." Okay. And I keep getting distracted a little bit. Okay. And Abraham hastened into the tent to Sarah and said, "Make ready quickly 3 measures of choice flour, knead it, and make cakes." Abram ran to the herd and took a calf, tender and good, and gave it to the servant, who hastened to prepare it. This is quite a choice piece of meat, right? Then he took curds and milk and the calf that he had prepared, or that he had prepared, and set it before them. And he stood by them under the tree while they ate. They said to him, "Where's your woman Sarah?" My translation says wife. "Where's your woman Sarah?" And he said, "They're in the tent." Then one said, "Not go fetch her so she can be a part of this conversation." Okay. "But I will surely return to you in due season, and your woman Sarah shall have a son." And Sarah was listening at the tent entrance behind him. Are you picturing the scene? There's something important being said about Sarah, and she's in the tent like a child listening to what's being said about her, right? Now, Abram and Sarah were old, advanced in age. It had ceased to be with Sarah after the manner of women. So Sarah laughed to herself, saying, "After I'm old and my husband is old, shall I have pleasure?" I love this. Okay, so I'm looking at a New Revised Standard Version, the physical copy that I have that's been updated. So the updated version of the New Revised Standard Version, so the NRSV UE updated edition, doesn't use "have pleasure," but "shall I," and I don't remember, but it's "shall I now bear children," or something, like some sort of indication that I'm old. How's it possible that I could have children? What's interesting to me is that when I have read this is just silly, but it's true, because of my, kind of being immersed in what goes on in biblical texts, etc. When I used to read this and I'd say, "Oh, shall I now have pleasure?" My first thought was always, "Oh, am I actually going to get to have an orgasm?" Because so many people misunderstand how many women have orgasms, or what helps to lead up to them and all that stuff. And I've seen way too many depictions of females having orgasms that are just not an orgasm. It's just a little bit of pleasure on the way to an orgasm. Anyway, and the way that sex is talked about in the Bible, it's like, I wouldn't be surprised if many of those women never actually had an orgasm. You know what I'm saying? The way it's done to them, etc. So, but the point is, that's not actually what she's talking about in context. What she's talking about in context is, shall I get to have the pleasure of being what is deemed appropriate or right for women, which is to use your uterus to bring forth a child. Anyway, the Lord said to Abraham, "Why did Sarah laugh and say, 'Shall I indeed bear a child now that I'm old?' Is anything too wonderful for the Lord? At the set time, I will return to you." He's still talking to Abraham, right? This is all about Sarah's uterus, and he's talking to Abraham. "At the set time, I will return to you in due season, and Sarah shall have a son." But Sarah denied, saying, "I did not laugh, for she was afraid." He said, "Oh, yes, you did laugh." Okay, so this is one piece of the story, and it's really fascinating to me. And to be honest, I don't know how much really to say beyond what I've already said. I just find it really fascinating that over and over and over, when we just take a very slow, deep breath, slow trotting through, we see this way of behaving, right? That men get to be the ones having the important conversations. Women, even when it's about a woman, even when the conversation is about the fact that a year from now, this miraculous thing, a woman in her old age, is going to give birth. It's not even about these two men. It's about this thing that God is going to do with or through Sarah. And Sarah's in the other room like a child, having to listen to it. And then when she hears about this miraculous, ridiculous thing for a 90-year-old woman to be giving birth, and she laughs at the ridiculousness of it, and then isn't sure if, when the guy asks why she laughs, if he's going to judge her, critique her, and she denies it because she's afraid. Like, there are so many elements of this story about, judgment, about this element of competitiveness for women, expected of women in terms of their production of children, the uneasiness of not knowing that she's safe to be herself, her genuine reaction is being critiqued and judged, and it's canonical. Like, so we have this very brief, like, she's beyond words at this idea, and someone's like, "Why did you laugh at that? Like, do you not know the power of God?" Or whatever the context is. And it just makes me really uncomfortable for her that she doesn't get to just have whatever her reaction is. Like, that was an honest reaction. And why are you judging her for it? And why are you, and she knows enough to be scared that her honest reaction isn't safe. Like, Do you hear what's happening in this story? Do you see the layers of issues here? She's in the tent like a child, listening to a conversation about herself, men talking between each other about a woman. Do you see what I'm getting at here? Like, do you see how common this is? Have you ever listened to two parents talking about a child who's actually in the room, but talking about like the child as if they're not there? Has that ever happened? Have you seen that happen? Have you been the recipient of that? How do you handle that? Why is that happening to begin with? What's going on between those two that they can't be honest and open up the conversation to include that person? What's at stake here? What kind of power dynamic is going down here? Why can't the messengers or the people, whether they're angels in human flesh or whatever it is, why can't they just come up to Sarah and say, hey, Sarah, guess what's going to happen? No, it has to be a conversation between the men, right? So ancient ideologies, ancient contexts, patriarchal, controlling the narrative, controlling power conversations are what's going on here. I am critiquing it because I just saw it happen this weekend, right? Or I just saw it happen last week. That's why I'm critiquing it. Not critiquing an ancient perspective or ancient cultures just because they are what they are. I'm critiquing them because they still play out in my world. And I want you to see it here so that you can have some grappling with seeing it in your own lives or around or in other lives around you, right? That's why I'm critiquing an ancient text. Okay. What else needs to be said about this? We've said some of the things already in the last week and a half or last week or whatever, because we're getting, it's kind of the same thing over and over. We're getting to some good stuff here, a different tune here tomorrow and the next few days. But women's bodies, right? It's in a sense more the same commodity. But I also really appreciate the stunning piece of Sarah getting a few lines. But what are those few lines? Those few lines are, right, she's in the background, having to eavesdrop on a conversation that's about herself, right? So infantilization, or however you want to condescend, whatever it is, whatever you want to call that. And then her honest response she's not even safe giving an honest response. Wow, that is powerful, isn't it? I think it is. Okay, let's move on to, I feel like I don't want to sell her short in this part. I feel like I might be doing that by moving on too quickly here, because she doesn't get many lines in the biblical storyline. So I want to make sure I'm doing her justice, but I think I've said what I need to say. Let me see if there are any comments here before I move on. Let me see. Comments. Oh, good. I'll look at the Exodus. Okay, I'm not sure what's. Okay, let's be fair here. Let's see. Men controlling reproduction. Yep. Okay, there's some things going on here that I'm not quite sure. I missed it since it wasn't happening while it was happening while I was talking, so I'm not quite sure where I need to chime in. Infantilization. Thank you, pregnant. Yeah, men controlling reproduction in the U.S. I absolutely think that's appropriate, right? It is. They're all connected, right? Yeah, the conversations between men about what happens in women's uteruses today, right? They get to control the narrative. They get to control what's allowed or not. For sure, it's connected. Yeah. I think I just keep realizing I'm not sure I'm giving Sarah enough airtime just in terms of either engaging what's happening for her and or giving her a little voice here. And that's part of the problem, is she's not given much. And I just side with her, right? I love the way people are like, yeah, I side with Hagar. I think Hagar is the strongest or the most interesting or courageous. And poor Sarah, just having an honest response, gets mocked by a divinity or a god and an angel in human clothes, right? And it's all canonized. It's like, oh God, this is just so frustrating. Yep. Same today. Yep. Just All very different. Yep. Okay, good. Thank you. All great, all great contributions. I appreciate that. I'm glad that we're all kind of tracking here. I do want to go ahead and read the second part of Genesis 18, since it does lead up nicely to what happens in Genesis 19. And I'll just leave it like this instead of making it full screen for myself. Okay. So, but also, even as I say that, I want to comment on the fact that this is a big deal. This little segment in chapter 18, it's only 15 verses, but it's a big deal in terms of in terms of what's going to happen for Sarah, and in terms of, sorry, I keep moving, jostling. Sorry, let me see if I can stabilize it a little better. This might help to stabilize it better. Let's see if I can do this way. Okay. It's just better lighting if it was over there. There's also an element of an ongoing piece of the biblical narrative is the number of verses, or the amount of the story that is given to a particular issue. So, there's that much more to say, perhaps, right? They gave the story what it needs to be, what it needs, perhaps. But then we get to this other thing going on for Sodom, and it gets just as much time, maybe a little bit longer. This conversation, again, between God and Abraham. So the men's conversations about men's things get more time than life-changing events for women. Whatever. But it is, it is what it is. I'm trying to find a good way to stabilize here. It's harder than you might think, sitting in your driver's seat. Okay. So here we go. We've got the rest of the story in chapter 18. Then the men set out from there. So the men being those who visited Abraham and Sarah. The men set out from there, and they looked toward Sodom. And Abraham went with them to set them on their way. The Lord said, I shall hide from Abraham what I am about to do, seeing that Abraham shall become a great and mighty nation, and all the nations of the earth shall be blessed in him. Sorry, it was a question. Shall I hide? No, for I have chosen him, that he may charge his children and his household after him to keep the way of the Lord by doing righteousness and justice, so that the Lord may bring about for Abram what he has promised him. Shall I hide from Abraham what I'm going to do? No, because I've chosen him. Okay, then the Lord said, I didn't read this ahead of time because I don't really care about this as much. I just want to read about this little exchange between God and Abraham. Then the Lord said, how great is the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah, and how very grave their sin. So I think that most of the people watching this are kind of with me on this, so I'm not sure that I need to get into this too much with you. But let's pay attention to what the narrative is saying in terms of what the sin is, or what the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is actually about. Okay, so the rest of this, and then tomorrow, what I'm interested in doing is helping people see what's being talked about in terms of what the sin is of Sodom and Gomorrah. Then I use sin in quotes because that's what they're calling it. And it's really interesting if you can, there are people who think the sin is, of course, that all the men in the town are homosexual, which is a really interesting claim to make. I've done kind of playfully a little take on that. Like, if the entire town of the towns of Sodom and Gomorrah were full of gay men, then they wouldn't be reproducing, and so God wouldn't need to punish them with a fireball from the sky. They'd also not be angry all the time, really vicious anger. There'd be a different way of venting their anger, and it'd be really fun. And I mean, there's a reason why a lot of my male friends are gay men. Like, they're just really delightful humans. There's just a whole thing to say there about the fact that it's just not really possible that that's what's going on. But people are told to read it that way. So people expect to see that, right? You find what you're looking for, right? So I just want to highlight that in Genesis 18, it's very clear that there's a problem in the cities, and the outcry against the cities has come to God's attention. So let's just play with it on its own terms, what it is actually telling us. The Lord said, how great is the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah, and how very grave their sin. I must go down and see whether they have done altogether according to the outcry that has come to me. And if not, I will know. Well, what is that outcry? We're not told, right? That's it. We don't know. And of course, people will read into that it is about a form of sexual engagement that some people today think is inappropriate, right? So men having sex with other men, okay? That you only get that because that's what you think it is, and you read that into it. The story itself does not tell us that. I just think that's very important to note. If you're ever going to have a conversation with someone about this story, that's an important thing to be able to start with. You can take any sort of life situation that you want, and if you assume that it's because they steal from each other, and you read the story through the lens of they're stealing from everybody, see, they're stealing from everybody, it will affirm that because it's talking about cruelty. And stealing from everybody is actually a form of cruelty. If you've been taught something that human sexuality doesn't uphold, which is to say, you've been taught that homosexuality is wrong, then, and you have that belief in your head and you read the story, it's gonna confirm that belief for you, okay? The story itself does not say anything about human sexuality, actually. The story itself talks about cruelty. And the story itself, as we will discuss tomorrow, talks about men being cruel to other men, wanting to be cruel to other men, and shaming other men in their culture, which is one thing that you do. That's how the greatest form of shame that one man can do to another is to rape him. So I'm going to keep reading the story. So the men turned from there, and we're still talking about these three angels or men who were messengers of God, and went toward Sodom, while Abraham remained standing before the Lord. So many comments. I just need to stick to the thread. Okay, then Abram came near and said, "Will you indeed sweep away the righteous with the wicked? Suppose there are 50 righteous within the city. Will you then sweep away the place and not forgive it for the 50 righteous who are in it? Far be it from you to do such a thing, to slay the righteous with the wicked, so that the righteous fare as the wicked. Far be that from you. Shall not the judge of all the earth do what is just?" It's an interesting thing, right? To have a human actually shaming the divine here into doing what is right. Which raises another conversation. Gosh, I want to get away from the specific thread of sex and marriage and physical abuse. A patriarchal mindset is full of shaming, right? That thinks that people are well motivated by shame, and we have that here, right? We have this, right? Is Abraham calling to God's higher, sense of self, or is Abraham actually kind of shaming God into doing what is right? I don't know that he's actually. Do you know what I'm saying? And shaming someone is a very common element of patriarchal thinking. I want to distinguish that from male thinking, patriarchal thinking, right? Anyway, let's keep going. Every story about, let's see. Somebody made a really interesting comment here. I want to see. Doesn't that discredit omni-God? Yes, I appreciate the comment, Constellation Pegasus. You're going to see wife all the time, all the time. That's the point. It's always wife, not woman. Yeah, that's, there's a comment here that says back in verse 15, there's a reference to calling Sarah Abraham's wife and not his woman, which I think it should say woman. And that will be the case throughout the entire Bible, both testaments, because the translation committees want us to think in terms of marriage when we're reading these stories, even though they weren't thinking in terms of anything that we call marriage. They were thinking of a very different kind of relationship. So I appreciate you pointing that out. And it will always be the case. And I guess I forgot to raise my hand on that one. There's another comment in here. Every story about God in the Bible makes all the omnis a lie. I would say that's all. I don't know if I can say that's true about every story, but I'm going to in general agree with that comment as well, that all the omnis that people are taught to believe are in the stories, or that people are taught to believe about who God is, they think it's in all the biblical stories, and it's not. So Hebrew Bible, we don't have omnis going on, really. We have a different kind of a God being talked about, who is limited in scope, just for the particular people. There's an acknowledgement that there are other gods in existence, So all kinds of things. That's important. But so let me get back to the story. Okay, you all carry on. So Abraham is doing a little bit of judging or a little bit of shaming. The Lord said, if I find at Sodom 50 righteous in this city, I will forgive the whole place for their sake. Abraham answered, let me take it upon myself to speak to the Lord, I who am but dust and ashes. That's really interesting. I've not read this in a long time. I'm nothing, but let me just speak to you anyway. I don't know. There's something anyway. Okay, I can critique everything all day long. Okay, suppose 5 of the 50 righteous are lacking. 5 of the 50 righteous are lacking. Will you destroy the whole city for lack of 5? And I will not destroy it if I find 45 there. Again, Abraham spoke to him, suppose 40 are found there. God answered, for the sake of 40, I will not do it. Then he said, oh, do not let the Lord be angry if I speak. Suppose 30 are found there. So I'm going to keep, okay, let's just keep focusing. God answered, I will not do it if I find 30 there. Abraham said, let me take it upon myself to speak to the Lord. Suppose 20 are found there. He answered, for the sake of 20, I will not destroy it. Then Abraham said, oh, do not let the Lord be angry if I speak just once more. Suppose 10 are found there. God answered, for the sake of 10, I will not destroy it. And the Lord went his way when he had finished speaking to Abraham, and Abraham returned to his place. And there you go. And then we get into Sodom tomorrow. I'm in a kind of cynical mindset today, I think. I'm like, and men like just like to hear themselves talk and tell a story. Well, okay. I mean, I think there's an interesting thing going on here in terms of like the concept of God, how people envision God to be and behave, which is not always, I think if people want to believe in this idea of a God, I think we should redefine what that is. I don't think it should look anything like this very human element of God that we see depicted over and over and over throughout the scriptures. We see somewhat a being who can be reasoned with or even shamed. That's fascinating. All kinds of things about this element of the story that I could discuss, but I'm trying to keep this to the issue of sex and marriage and abuse involving intimate parts. So let's see. Yeah, so I think that's all there is to say on that. We're going to jump into tomorrow. We'll jump into the story about Sodom. We already read the part about Lot's daughters, and then we get to move on to some other things about back to Abram and Hagar and Ishmael, and then we're getting close to the next generation and some really interesting things. What I thought, let me just wrap up with this one thought, that almost every story, so I did skip a couple chapters maybe 13, 14, and 15 or something like that. But it's worth noting how many of the stories actually have something related to this topic, right? This second half of 18 doesn't, but the second half of 18 is important for understanding tomorrow, talking about Sodom and Gomorrah. What did we just learn about the quote wickedness versus righteousness of the people in Sodom? We didn't learn anything, except for the fact that there are people there who are being deemed unrighteous. There's people there who are being deemed inappropriate or cruel, not righteous, and so no one delineated what it is, that based on what's the thing that we're deeming that the people of Sodom are ignoring or, giving a thumb to, or like whatever, you know what I mean? Like nosing, thumbing their nose at, like whatever it is, like they haven't delineated. It's not clear. So we have to come at this through the lens of what we can know about the cultural expectations and practices of what become the Israelite people, so the Hebrew people now, and what become the Israelites. And it's a very fascinating piece that we'll talk about tomorrow. And I need to end at this point. I just saw some interesting comments. So very, very quickly. Oh goodness, somebody just referenced the salt trade. And I'm so intrigued by that, which is not relevant to things I'm talking about, but I just think it's very interesting, the whole salt thing. I need to link one of our episodes, one of the conversations I had on a podcast last year about Lot's wife, the story of Lot's wife. If it wasn't for religion, so I'm going to read one of the comments here real quick and then we'll wrap up. If it wasn't for religion, I think right now we would be going to different planets. We would have all these starships, all this stuff we see in movies. But if it wasn't for religion, as in we would be so much farther advanced because we wouldn't have been held back in certain ways, I think is what you're getting at. So, hi, blessed be he. I wonder if there's a blessed be she on here also. Okay. Thank you for showing up. Thank you for paying attention, for being interested in what I'm trying to do here. I hope that I'm raising some points for you in terms of the way you think about these passages, whether they are sacred for you or not, and that you're reflecting on the elements in these passages, in these scriptures, that we can see through, kind of the hindsight we can look at and critique on a certain level. But the reason I think it's important to do that is because people are still reading them without seeing the problems. And that's a part of why they can continue within our own cultures and contexts, that men speak on behalf of women, that men are more important, that men get to rule the day, that men are the umbrella under which women are taken under and protected or something. All this language, all this way of behaving that's actually not in everybody's best interest. The idea that there's something big that's going to happen to Sarah and she's, being infantilized in the whole exchange. And she doesn't even feel safe to have her own honest reaction to something and is actually scared. She's right for being scared. That all of that, right? Just really negative, controlling narratives, right? And they do still impact people today. These elements of the scriptures and of the relationships that we're getting to witness through these narratives, those elements are still alive and well today. And so I think it can be a useful way for us to be able to then talk about it when we see it in our lives today, to be able to look at this old one and say, see how this plays out? That's not really helpful. And then that gives you a way to look at and talk about it a little less defensively when you do see it in your own life or in the lives of people around you that you care about and want to have this conversation with or whatever, right? That's what I'm up to. So I will see you all tomorrow. I know, Martin, thank you. You guys are great. Oh, it's just fun. Thank you all for being so positive and for showing up. And for those of you who are watching later, I hope this has also been good for you. And I'll see you tomorrow. I'm looking forward to talking about this story tomorrow in Genesis chapter 19. Okay? Thanks.